Welcome back, everyone. Last episode was a little bit of a slow one. We got two things done, and those were epoxy resin and upgrading our cobble works. And as usual, I've been made a fool in the comments yet again. There's an infinity cobble cell. I don't need rock breakers to make cobblestone, which is brilliant. I want to thank everybody for the comments on the last episode, telling me about the igneous extruder as well and the infinity cobble cell. But my silly antics aside, let's get moving into this episode. We have one main objective for this episode, and that is power. We want to replace our gas turbines with free energy from the sun. And to briefly remind you what that's going to take, that's just going to take a bunch of these elite solar generators. And in today's episode, I want to generate 1 million RF per tick just off solar panels alone. That's going to take 100 of these. We need to invest in IV infrastructure to make this happen. We need tungsten steel, we need silicon, and we need an IV circuit assembler. Which means a few things. Least of all, we're going to need to replace this clean room. Sometimes size does matter. We're also going to have to invest heavily into the nether stars because we do need quantum stars. But let's get into it. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. So let's just quickly assess where we're at right now. We're just starting to come into the insane voltage era, and we need to start making nanocircuits. And the clean room is just becoming too limiting for me to be able to work effectively in it, especially if we're going to want to make fiber reinforced boards at any speed. So let's craft all the materials for a brand new clean room, and then we'll build it. So first up, filter casings. We need 120 of them. Ooh, no nickel. All right, let's set a recipe for that. All right, 120 filter casings. I know we're not going to have the ingredients, but let's just see what we're missing. So polyethylene, buffering issue, steel, we'll just put some iron through the blast furnace, and stone, which we'll just manually craft. And we'll just put this in our ore processing macerator because it's fast enough. Yeah, as I said, nice and fast. Okay, so we'll just craft hundreds at a time. We can make that. And while waiting on these two massive crafts, we need to look at getting platinum cable for our IV machine hulls. And the problem with this is we need one of these two rubbers, styrene, butadiene, or silicone. And later down the track, we're actually going to need to have both. So why don't we make both now? And let's start by tearing down our old rubber system. Served us well, but now rubber is no longer useful. We need the others. Okay, so we've got our layout sorted here. We're going to need 2 chemical reactors for silicon rubber. And that's because of this shortcut here where we put water, chlorine, methane, and silicon to make the polydimethyl siloxane dust and hydrochloric acid. And then we just mix that with sulfur to make rubber. Then the styrene butadiene, we need our rubber recipe with sulfur. We also need to actually make the pulp, which is styrene, butadiene, and oxygen. And we need to be able to make styrene, which is ethylene and benzene. And then we also want to be able to make ethylene. So we're going to mix sulfuric acid and ethanol in a large chemical reactor to make ethylene because this is really slow. And we're going to run all of these at high voltage because we have the hatches and it's pretty cheap and because these are passive. So 15 seconds to make ethylene. Not a bad trade-off. So we're going to need 6 controller blocks. And that can go into the crafting queue now. And while we're at the terminal, let's actually start to take a look at our ME hatches. Now the ME hatches are a little bit expensive, but it means that we really only need to have 1 hatch per machine. So let's set the recipes. This is our input bus. We need to be able to make this type of interface and an EV hatch. So this interface is actually very simple. It's just a 1-to-1 conversion. And the input hatch, also simple. So there's our stocking input hatch done. Now we need the stocking input bus, which is the same. Except we need an input bus instead, which is just a chest. And we can make all of that. So we can put our stocking buses into our almost entirely full EV assembling machine. The EV input and output hatches can go into just a pattern provider onto a molecular assembler. And so can the interface. So let's just start requesting a few of them and see how expensive they are. Well, they don't actually take any circuits, so that's beautiful. Let's get 20 of each then. I'm out of crafting CPUs. That's fine. I think we'll also upgrade applied energistics this episode, because this is taking so long. Alright, let's get this show on the road. We've got our hatches, we've got our buses. Let's start. So we'll start with the simplest one. This dimethyl siloxane dust. And this is why I love the stocking buses. Look at all of these fluid inputs. No need to worry about having 19 different ones. Okay, so let's get our silicon in here. Probably gonna need 64. And then fluids. So we need methane. Oh my gosh. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to set the recipes from EMI into the hatch, so bear with me, this is going to take some time. I'm just going to cut back to when it's all done. Okay, and we're back, and we're just using universal cells, pretty simple. And we have to make sure we get the amounts for the recipe correct, which is 4 buckets of chlorine and 2 buckets of methane. There we are. Now once we build this reactor, this should start working. Well, you can't convert the input hatches to output hatches with a screwdriver, so we have to set recipes for the output versions as well. So the ME output bus, same thing as the input bus, except we need an output one, same with the hatch. And now our pattern terminal is definitely full. And the rubber really is as simple as combining the dust with sulfur. So let's just do a sneaky little trick here to pass items through different chemical reactors. We'll just place an output bus facing upwards that can only access the bottom chemical reactor, and then we'll place an input bus facing down onto that so that the output of the bottom chemical reactor goes into the shared input of both of them, and there's no way that this bottom one can use it, so it just sits there until the top one has recipes. So now all we need to do is give this access to some sulfur, we'll give it access to a stack, give the bottom one its output hatch for the hydrochloric acid and diluted hydrochloric acid, and just finish off these chemical reactors. And I think we're at a little bit of a problem here. It appears that these seem to not actually be working properly. And I think it's because we're actually running out of power, like we're not supplying enough. What I'm going to do just to get this stuff to work is I'm just going to switch the platinum processing off. Okay, it looks like I might have just had to set the buffering amount to more. Or not, it actually still appears to not be working. Okay. That's the issue. For some bizarre reason, the ME output hatches don't actually work. So that's good to know now, I guess. Yep, because there's our polydimethyl siloxane dust. So we'll just place interfaces on the output hatches and just send it back into the system. And we'll pause this chemical reactor just for now, because we need space for 2 more rubbers. So silicon and styrene. So silicon rubber in here, and styrene butadiene in here. And let's just make sure we set our fluid output off the back. Now we can turn this chemical reactor on, set the fluid output hatch, and an interface. And now we see silicon rubber coming into the super tank. And now we just have to do the same with styrene butadiene, which I'm not going to show you, for the sake of time. So it's been a little bit, but now we are actually accumulating lots of our new types of rubber, both silicone and styrene butadiene. And so now we can check one thing off the list, and that is platinum cabling. We want to use our styrene butadiene because it's actually cheaper than the silicon rubber. And we just need to be able to make platinum wires, but otherwise, we're actually going to start to unlock some IV components. So let's check what we need to start making some IV machine hulls. We need PTFE, platinum cable, and IV machine casings. And so IV machine casings are just tungsten steel plates. So we want to be able to make that. I think we also want to be able to make our double tungsten steel plates for our solar panels. So we should be able to get an IV machine hull now. And so we're still needing this elite assembler here. Let's start crafting some of the components that we're going to need. And we only have one of them so far. So we've got our motor. We also need 2x tungsten wires. Just going to need cables, graphene wire, which is going to need graphene ingots, which is going to need graphene dust. We also need tungsten steel rods. So now let's speed through and get the rest of the components, and I'll see you back when we can actually auto craft our IV assembler. So without upgrading the clean room, this is going to take a while because we're still using our plastic circuits, but here we go. Let's request. Oh, this is going to be expensive. Let's just wait for that to all be finished, and then once that's done, we'll look for the annealed copper and what that was lacking. But while we're here, how about we take a look at our AE2 system? Yeah, so this is an absolute mismatch of different crafting CPUs. And this is just terrible. We can't be going into the mid-game of Gregtech with this. So let's use what little CPU we have left to try and automate some more crafting supplies. So we're going to upgrade to 8 crafting CPUs with 8x16 capacity and 8 coprocessors. So that is 64 of each process. So we can take these 16K crafting CPUs. We're missing 600 silicon ingots. Yes, solid. I also think that we don't have enough CPU space for that. Well, that's a bummer. Let's fix that and then we can request that. Certainly a lot of waiting around for this episode. Okay, so we have encoded the recipe for the silicon ingot. So now we should just be able to start requesting our crafting CPUs. And we'll have to do 32 at a time because 64 is too big for our CPUs. And we'll queue up the other half now as well. And lots of waiting later, let's actually install these CPUs. So the plan is to put them right underneath our tree greenhouse. And it's useful to note that crafting CPUs, all they have to be is square. So this arrangement works, so does this, and so does this. But for me personally, I'm a big fan of the alternating cubes, just like this. And so with one placed, let's get the rest down. And now we're going to do the same with our molecular assembler extended pattern provider crafting things. So we need 64 extended pattern providers. So odd. I actually have no idea what's asking for oak planks. Probably the crafting tables. It was the crafting table, so I've changed these out for spruce planks. Back into the provider. So let's request 64 extended pattern providers. And then 64 molecular assemblers. And wow, look at those CPUs now. We have 8 crafting CPUs with 128K storage. I don't think we'll be left wanting anytime soon. And here's a brief update on our base. So we have extended a pathway that runs around the middle section, stemming from our 2 crafting systems, from our oil distillation and our auto crafting. I've also prepared the next location for our clean room. And now that we've upgraded crafting, let's upgrade the clean room. And more waiting later as well. Now we have our 64 of each here, and an egg. So in a similar way, these don't actually need to be a certain shape. So over here, our original setup looks pretty pathetic. We could speed it up by just doing this, but that's not expandable, is it? So let's fill this area, like we did with our crafting CPUs, with actual crafters. And that's what they're going to look like. Not the prettiest, but it'll do. And here we are. Our applied energistics room is now completed. I'm not sure we're ever going to need to upgrade these. This is so much space for patterns, we don't have to care anymore. And we have a friend walking around now. So with our very handy magnet, let's just start putting patterns in providers. And just to kind of give an explanation as to why this design is so optimal, one pattern provider here, or let's just use this one. If we requested sulfur, it would send a recipe into this molecular assembler, this one, this one, this one, and behind it, giving us 5 total times the crafting speed as compared to just one. Pretty good, right? So let's just start requesting some more plascrete, and we'll start placing down our filter casings. And here's just a quick reminder of what a clean room needs to look like. You need to have filter casings on the middle blocks except for the center, which needs to be the controller, and the outsides need to be plascrete. Otherwise, any arrangement works in any capacity. As long as the corners, oh no, not even. As long as the corners are either an energy hatch or maintenance or plascrete, you're all good. The roof needs to be filter casings, the middle needs to be the clean room. And again, it's just a waiting game. How about I leave you to imagine what it's going to look like me building this, and we'll come back to when it's done. And here it is, a big, white, sterile box. We've got our bottom entrance, which is going to be where most of the chemical processes are, and then a top entrance, just for funsies. I'm allowed to have fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up high voltage processors in here, EV processors in there, and then IV power just under there. And in the corners, I think we'll have large chemical reactors. These are enough to fit 4 LCRs here, 4 LCRs here. And maybe we'll end up putting, laser engravers and things along the top. I don't know yet. We'll see how it works. But we've actually got to tear everything out of this old clean room as well and move it to the new one. So again, another cut, and I'll be back shortly. So you're joining me in the clean room, and I'm going to show you a little trick with Gregtech multi-blocks. Recipes inside a large chemical reactor often require both item inputs and fluid inputs. But if we want to use a large chemical reactor, we don't have item and fluid combined input buses. Now I'm going to show you a little trick on how to get around that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our extended pattern provider. And for our sake, we're going to want to have all of our processing boards. Just like this, and these have an item and a fluid input. What we can do is we can send these into an ME ingredient buffer, and the ingredient buffer is going to store items and fluids in it, and then we're going to pull it out into an input bus and an input hatch. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to have an input bus and an input hatch. We'll face them downwards, and then because we're not restricted by Gregtech in this, we can have an item pipe pulling out of the ingredient buffer and a fluid pipe, just making it simpler. And we'll just right click to extract. And now anytime we request any of these patterns, including our sodium persulfate, the required items and fluids are going to be sent into the chemical reactor with no problems. It is as simple as that, but it can get more complicated when you move into more complicated processes. And proof is in the pudding, so let's just have a look and see if our printed boards can craft nice and quickly. Let's just request about 10 epoxy printed boards. Oh, we're limited by the extraction speed. Nice. Luckily, I come prepared with 2 improved upgrades. One there and one there. 14 ticks. That is going to significantly speed up our circuit crafting. And I'll continue to work on that as time goes by. This is looking a bit empty right now, but I promise you it's going to look fuller soon. So back on track, let's just request these 2 IV circuits. And yeah, those circuit boards just craft so much faster now. That is very nice. And with the completion of that craft, let's get our IV assembler one step closer. So right now we don't actually generate any IV power. So we're just going to have to transform our EV power up. Pretty simple there. We just need an EV transformer, which we can make everything except the MPICs. We just manually craft those for the moment. And there we are, all done. So let's request an EV transformer. Beautiful. And now we can actually use our IV assembler. Clean room update. Here we are. If you have been around the channel for a little bit, you'll recognize the laser engraving wall behind me. 8 lenses for 8 different circuits, or wafers that is, CPU, RAM, ULP, LP, MP, NAND, and NOR memory. Currently, it is working on some CPU wafers because we have our nano CPU production up and running. Nano CPUs really are as simple as a CPU wafer, raw carbon fibers, and energized glowstone. Currently, we're running them at EV, so it does take 60 seconds, but our nano CPUs is going to unlock the next tier of circuits and will be used pretty frequently going forwards. And in the quest page, let's grab a nano CPU wafer, set the recipe for it to be cut down, and start setting the recipes for our nano processors. So the first one here is our cheapest high voltage tier circuit. It takes epoxy printed boards, the nano CPU, and the rest of the components which we already have. As you can see by those little pluses there, means we can craft them. And let's just set this to 1 ingot, which is 144 millibuckets. Done. High voltage circuits done. EV circuits are almost the exact same, except we need 2 ingots of tin. Our new IV circuits, just beefier and still requiring 2 ingots. And the real reason why we needed to upgrade our circuit tier is for the LUV circuits, which takes 576 millibuckets of tin. Beautifully done. We've now theoretically unlocked the LUV chapter. Of course, we're actually nowhere near it at all, but let's just say we have. So reminding ourselves of exactly what we need now, we need the Elite Solar Cell, which is going to require the IV circuit assembler, which is incredibly painful, mostly because of this, the IV emitter. The IV emitter takes a quantum star, and a quantum star comes from a nether star. And going back through it, we actually need to make the implosion compressor, which is just a bunch of steel, that's fine. But then we need nether star dust, which we get from small piles of nether star dust, which in turn comes from nether star shards, which comes from chemical bathing nether star essence in radon, which comes from mixing 4 different charges. These charges come from mixing coal dust with gunpowder and the required powder. And this powder comes from different things. Blitz powder comes from platinum dust and deuterium, which deuterium is going to come from our air distillation. So, to get the solar panels, we need our air distillation setup that we were going to set up originally. We then also need this awful, terrible, very expensive nether star setup. We need an implosion compressor, turn them into quantum stars, and then we can make the solar panels. Got all that? Good, because I'm not going to bore you with it. I'll show you the recipes, and that's it. This is going to take an extremely long time. So let's time lapse through it so that it's not too long for you. So, let's get into it. Alright, so as you saw in the time lapse, we placed a lot of blocks, and those blocks look like this. We've got our mystical greenhouse growing right now at 3 seconds per item. Don't worry about the power loss there. We're kind of on the verge of needing to upgrade the wires. And we're just using a regular item pipe here to move essences between these 3 burners. I didn't feel like using the applied energistic system for such a short travel time. No point adding power to the system. So we are looking to make air, nether air, and ender air. And if we essence burn air here, we're just going to go circuit 1. So in the essence burner, we can just press circuit 1, and we should burn it into air. Beautiful, that was fast. Now one can only imagine what circuit number nether air is going to go on. It's circuit 2. So circuit 2 it is. Taking a little bit longer now. Okay, we are definitely consuming about as much power as we're making at the moment. But there's nether air. And then let's guess, is this going to be circuit 3? Oh, you bet. Circuit 3. Alright, it did actually get a craft out of the way. So, 16 buckets per craft here is actually fantastic, given it really only takes about 3 seconds to make an air essence. But we'll turn that off for now. We don't need to produce any more. So now let's set up the vacuum freezers. So our first is going to be air. And I forgot. God damn it, man. So the first freezer is going to be dedicated to air. And we can just boop. And we'll just boost this up to a full stack. The next one is going to be nether air. And again, we'll just boost this up to a full stack. And ender air. And we can just plug them in. And I guarantee you we're going to have some power flickers. Yeah, we are really starting to run low on power. Also, the reason we're running out of power at the moment is because we have a blast furnace going, and these 4 blast furnaces take up literally half of our power generation. This takes up 16 amps of EV power. It's an insane amount of power. So we've actually had to change back to the old system now because I'm having a recurring issue where the ME fluid hatches are voiding inputs. Even when there's no reason for them to void, they just seem to void items. So I'm going to have to go through and replace the ME hatches back with regular hatches. So all the vacuum freezers have now worked through their buffers. It's time to set the recipes. So liquid air goes into the first distillation tower. Liquid nether air goes into the second. And liquid ender air goes into the third. So our air distillation has finished. And this gives us way more nitrogen, lots of oxygen, carbon dioxide, helium, and argon. And look, the last 2 ones aren't that useful, but argon is used in a few of our later tier smelting recipes in the blast furnace, and so is helium. We're also going to use helium now for our nether star production, which is why we set this whole thing up in the first place. So this has run through 2 crafts already. Let's just pause this for a second while we conserve power. And let's run a cycle of our nether air. 50 seconds as well because we're running this at IV instead of at EV. And now we've had 1 cycle of our nether air go through, which gets us carbon monoxide, coal gas. Can't remember what was in here. Let's just check. Hydrogen sulfide, which has already been electrolyzed for hydrogen and sulfur, which is nice. Then sulfur dioxide, helium-3, and neon. Neon is another one of our very late game smelting materials, except for ruthenium, trinium, americium neutronate ingots, which for some bizarre reason require titanium coils at MV. I think the scaling's wrong on this one. And helium-3, I believe, is fusion. Yeah, easy. So we should have enough now to run our end-to-air distillation. So let's run a cycle of that now. Nope, not yet. And for all our hard work, this is the prize. More pretty colors. We have nitrogen dioxide, deuterium, helium, tritium, krypton, xenon, and radon. But as much as I'd love to continue building and continue going on with our journey this episode, I think it's that time. It's time to end the episode. We did get through a fair amount today. Back into the old style, roughly speaking. We managed to set up our cryogenic air distillation, finally get into some mystical agriculture, make a lot of yummy rubbers, and redo the most important room in the base. And if you liked this video, well, the algorithm buttons are just down below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and you follow this series along for more. We're getting to the juicy part now. Next episode, we're finally going to get the solar panels. I know I've been saying that for a while, but I reckon we finally will do it. Assuming nothing goes wrong, of course. But with that, it's time to say goodbye. I'll see you next time.